Before we really begin, I want you to picture something: a woman standing alone in a drafty kitchen, clutching a letter she was never supposed to find. That woman was me. My name is Evelyn Moore, and I live in a small, stubborn town called Redmond Pines, tucked between the cracked hills of New Mexico. I am 74 years old, and I have spent a lifetime gathering the broken pieces of other people's dreams, patching them together with spit, prayer, and quiet determination. I thought that would be enough. It wasn't. It started 3 months ago on a rainless, windy March afternoon when I found a letter jammed between old cookbooks in the pantry. A letter that had no business being there. It was addressed in a spidery hand I didn't recognize, postmarked 1978 from Charleston, South Carolina, and it was sealed with a brittle piece of brown tape. I should have put it back. Should have left it buried with the dust and dead crickets. But something in me, something sharp and old and aching, made me open it. The letter was from my late husband's brother, a man who had disappeared from our lives decades ago without a word. It was a confession. A searing, desperate confession. He wrote of debts. Of betrayal. Of a deal struck that involved our daughter, Miriam, when she was just a toddler. He had borrowed money against our house without telling us, forged my husband's signature. When he couldn't pay, he had promised the lender something more valuable than land. He never said what. Only that he made it right before things could go too far. My stomach turned cold. What could be more valuable than land? I sat there at the cracked pine table for a long time, the letter trembling in my hand, the hum of the refrigerator growing louder and louder in the heavy silence. The memories started clawing at the edges of my mind. The night Miriam disappeared for hours at the county fair when she was 7, the bruises we chalked up to playground clumsiness. The nightmares that made her scream into her pillow long after she stopped coming into our bed. I told myself it was nothing. Children are resilient. Wounds heal. But deep down, sitting in that hard kitchen chair, I knew I had been lying to myself for decades. I folded the letter carefully as if rough handling would make the truth inside it worse. I tucked it into the inside pocket of my worn cardigan and stared out the window at the dry hills, the brittle mesquite trees scratching against the air. I should have burned it. Should have pretended I never saw it. That would have been the easy thing. The kind of thing I'd spent my life doing. Instead, I picked up the phone. Not to call Miriam. Not yet. I called my lawyer. Because sometimes after a lifetime of swallowing hurt like cold soup, a woman finds that her appetite for silence has run out. And that day mine finally did. A week after the letter, as if fate knew I was teetering, another blow came. My son-in-law, Chase Hallberg, bless his reckless, stubborn heart, called me up in the middle of the night. It wasn't the first time he'd asked for something, but this time was different. His voice trembled in that brittle way pride does when it's about to crack. "Evelyn," he said, "I hate to ask, but we're in a bind." He'd started a small auto repair business the summer before, convinced he could turn a dying dream into a golden ticket. I had my doubts. The shop he chose to rent was in the priciest part of nearby Rockwell Junction, a town slick with shiny SUVs and boutique cafes. I warned him. Oh, I warned him. "Chase," I said back then, "rent is a snake that'll squeeze you dry before you see a dime of profit. Find a cheaper spot." But like a boy poking a hornet's nest, he didn't listen. And now he needed $15,000 fast. I had been saving that money. Every sliver of my pension, tucked away in a quiet little fund, was meant for something sacred, a trip to Los Angeles. It sounds silly maybe, but I had dreamed of seeing the Pacific, feeling the breeze in my hair, touching the glittering edge of the world before my bones grew too weary to travel. I said no at first. Lord help me, I tried to say no. But then Miriam called. Her voice wasn't trembling. No, it was sharp and cold, like a blade you don't see until it's pressed against your throat. "You have to help him, Mom." I tried to reason, to remind her that I was scraping by on pension checks and second-hand hope. But she wouldn't hear it. "He's your family now," she snapped. "Isn't that what you always said? Family first." I gave in. I swallowed every ounce of pride and wired the money. The shop staggered along for 3 pitiful months before collapsing like a tent in a hurricane. Late bills, angry customers, a lease he couldn't break. Chase closed up overnight, left a note on the door and a pile of debt on the sidewalk. No money left. No apology. Not even a thank you. And when I brought it up, when I dared to mention my drained savings, Miriam looked at me the way you look at a broken clock, with a kind of exhausted disdain. "We never asked you to do that," she said, crossing her arms like a wall between us. "Never asked." As if I hadn't been backed into a corner and told family was the gun pointed at my heart. I went to bed that night and dreamed of the ocean I would never see. And when I woke up, something inside me, something old and fragile, had cracked so deeply, I knew it would never quite heal. The days blurred after Chase's business folded. Spring clawed its way into Redmond Pines, all dust and false promises, and I spent my mornings staring out the kitchen window, watching tumbleweeds dance across the yard like mocking spirits. I had thought losing my savings would be the final blow. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday. I remember because the garbage truck rumbled by late, when my neighbor Doris Caldwell shuffled across the yard with her dog Muffin. Doris wasn't the type to gossip. She was the type to drop a truth like a stone into your hands and let you feel the weight for yourself. "Saw your Chase down at Ronson's Tavern last night," she said, scratching Muffin's ears. "He sure looked like he'd struck gold." I blinked at her. "Gold?" She nodded. "Celebrating. Talking about a payout. Real animated about some property deal he and Miriam cooked up." "Property deal?" My heart knocked against my ribs like a trapped bird. Chase was bankrupt. Miriam's teaching job barely covered groceries. How could they possibly be dealing in property? I thanked Doris, tucked the information into my chest like a live coal, and tried to breathe. That night, unable to sleep, I rifled through the papers in my filing cabinet. Bank statements, house deeds, anything that might explain. That's when I saw it. A slip of paper tucked between my old will and a yellowed gas bill. An application for a reverse mortgage. Signed by me. Only I had never signed it. My signature, my name, my home, all hijacked. Forged. The edges of my vision went white. Miriam. Chase. They had used my trust, my house, to bankroll their next scheme. Sold the future right out from under me without a whisper of shame. I clutched the kitchen counter, willing my legs not to give out. Outside, the moon hung low and heavy, a rotten fruit about to fall. The betrayal wasn't just about money anymore. It was theft. It was a knife in the back from the very child I had rocked to sleep, fed from my own weary hands, taught to ride a bike in the cracked driveway of this very house. I wanted to scream. I wanted to collapse. Instead, I reached for the cordless phone, the one with the cracked 2-key, and I called my lawyer again. "Louise," I said when she answered, "I need to talk. It's worse than I thought." And so the quiet, furious gears of justice began to turn. This time I would not be silent. This time they would hear me. The morning I decided to confront Miriam, the desert wind carried a strange kind of chill, sharp enough to make the old oak branches creak like the bones of forgotten things. I stood at the sink, staring at the cracked window, feeling that same old ache pressing against my ribs. It wasn't fear. Not anymore. It was mourning for a daughter who had gone missing long before the papers were ever forged. I didn't call ahead. I didn't announce myself. I simply drove to their house, the one with the wide porch I'd helped them paint the summer after they got married, my hands blistering under the July sun while Miriam laughed, barefoot in the grass. When I pulled up, Chase's rusted pickup was gone, but Miriam's silver sedan gleamed in the driveway. Good. Better this way. I knocked once. Twice. The door swung open so fast I wondered if she'd been watching from the window. "Mom," she said, her eyes narrowing, arms folded tight against her chest. "We need to talk," I said. My voice didn't shake. Didn't need to. It had the weight of decades behind it. She stepped aside and I walked in. The living room smelled like lemon cleaner and faint desperation. A stack of unopened bills sat crooked on the hall table. A pile of children's shoes, too small, too worn, cluttered the floor near the coat rack. We sat across from each other, the coffee table a battlefield between us. "Is this about Chase?" she asked, her tone sharp, impatient, like I was a client wasting her time. "No," I said quietly. "This is about you." Her eyes flickered just for a moment, but she masked it well. Always had. I pulled the reverse mortgage application from my purse, the paper worn from where my thumb had traced the lies again and again. I laid it on the table, face up. She didn't look shocked. She didn't even flinch. "Where did you find that?" she asked instead, her voice low, dangerous. "Where I keep the things that matter," I said. "You thought I wouldn't notice? That I'd just fade away while you and Chase carved up my life like a pie?" Her mouth tightened into a thin, cruel line. "You don't understand," she hissed. "You have no idea how hard it's been. Chase lost everything. We were drowning. So you decided to drown me too?" I whispered. A heavy silence settled between us. Miriam stood up, pacing the worn carpet, arms crossed tight like armor. "We were going to pay you back," she said finally, "once the new business picked up. You forged my name," I said. "You risked the roof over my head. You stole my security, my dignity. You're old, she snapped, whirling around to face me. What do you even need all that for? You're alone. You sit in that dusty house talking to yourself and feeding stray cats. Her words hit like fists, but I didn't flinch. I stood up slowly, my bones creaking but my spine iron strong. You think because I'm alone, I'm nothing, I said. You think because I'm old, I'm invisible. But I built a life. I built you. I sacrificed every dream, every hope, every ounce of strength so you could have a life better than mine. And you repay me with lies. Miriam looked away, but not before I saw it, the flash of guilt, raw and real. I'm taking back my house, I said, my voice steady. I've spoken to the lawyer. The reverse mortgage is void because of the forgery. And as for you and Chase. I let the words hang in the air, heavy and final. We're done. She opened her mouth to argue, to plead, maybe even to rage, but I didn't stay to hear it. I walked out the front door and into the harsh, bright sunlight. The air smelled like dust and endings. But somewhere beneath it, faint and stubborn, I caught a whiff of something else. The first days after the confrontation felt like learning to breathe again through cracked ribs. I spent my mornings in the sunroom, the one Chase always said was a waste of space, watching dust motes swirl in the light and sipping bitter coffee that tasted better with solitude. The phone stayed mercifully silent. No apologies, no second chances. Miriam understood, in that hard, self-righteous way of hers, that the door was closed. I thought the worst of it was over. I thought the old scars had been reopened, scrubbed raw, and now they could heal. But life, I've learned, doesn't move in straight lines. It loops, it folds, it throws old stones at your windows when you least expect it. It was a Thursday when it came. I remember because I just returned from the farmer's market, arms aching from carrying too many tomatoes and too much hope. There, wedged between a water bill and a glossy coupon for hearing aids, was a pale blue envelope with handwriting so familiar my knees nearly buckled. Clara Danvers. My oldest friend. Clara, who had stood by me through the worst of my marriage, through the long, barren years after James left. Clara, who had moved to Oregon 15 years ago and drifted into the soft mist of sometime promises. I opened the letter at the kitchen table, the same table where I had nursed coffee and broken dreams for too long. Dearest Evie, it's been too long. I'm not writing to scold or apologize. Life has its ways of sweeping us into corners we never meant to hide in. I've thought of you often. I've missed you. And now, I'm coming back. For good. My granddaughter lives nearby, and I've found a small place just 2 towns over. I'll be arriving next month. I would love, if you're willing, to sit with you again, share some tea, and remember the women we were, and the ones we've become. All my love, Clara. The letter trembled in my hands. It was written in a different hand than I remembered, shakier, slower, but it was Clara's heart on the page, sure and stubborn as ever. I pressed the paper to my chest and closed my eyes. A part of me, the part Miriam had tried to hollow out with her cruelty, stirred back to life. Someone remembered. Someone cared enough to come back. I spent the rest of the day cleaning the house like a woman expecting royalty. I dusted the old photo frames, wiped down the windows until they shone, set aside my best tea set, the one James had never let me use because guests don't care about china. As the sun dipped low and the sky turned the color of old bruises, I sat on the porch and let myself imagine what it would be like to have Clara close again. To laugh without fear of being mocked. To speak without having my words twisted into weapons. I wasn't naive. Life had roughened us both. There would be awkwardness, regrets, old pains stitched into our conversations like invisible threads. But there would also be warmth. Recognition. Family, the kind you choose, not the kind that chooses to wound you. As the stars blinked awake one by one, I made a vow to myself. I would not let the past steal any more of my present. In the morning, when Clara arrived, the whole world smelled like rain. In Redmond Pines, there were usually only a few pitiful drops, but that day the sky was overcast with heavy clouds, and the air was saturated with the smell of wet earth. It seemed like a sign. Or maybe a blessing. I couldn't decide. I stood on the porch, clutching the edge of my sweater, waiting for her old blue sedan to come around the corner. And when she finally appeared, I barely recognized her. Clara had always been a strong personality, wild curls, loud laughter, a woman who entered a room like a summer storm. But time had taken its toll. She was smaller, her shoulders slightly stooped, her once bright red hair now a silver braid. But when she got out of the car and smiled at me with that same mischievous twinkle in her eyes, I recognized her in an instant. "Eve Moore," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with excitement. "You still have the best porch in town." I laughed a real laugh, rusty and untrained, and hurried down the stairs. We embraced, a hug that healed old wounds without words. Come in, I said, leading her inside and apologizing for the dusty floors, peeling wallpaper, and chipped china. She waved her hand, dismissing it all. We sat in the sunny room, sipping tea and continuing our old conversations as if no time had passed. We talked about grandchildren, sore knees, half-read books, and half-kept promises. But as time passed, I noticed something. A hesitation in Clara's voice. A tension behind her smile. Finally, when the rain began to tap on the windows like nervous fingers, she sighed and put down her cup. "Evie," she said quietly, "I have something to tell you." My stomach clenched. I nodded, preparing for the worst. She took a thin envelope out of her purse and slid it across the table. "I didn't come back just for the family," she said. "I came back for this." My hands trembled as I took the envelope and opened it. An old, yellowed photograph of 3 children playing under a huge oak tree. And a name circled in red, James Moore. My husband. "After James left you," Clara said slowly, "he didn't just disappear. He started a new life, here in the next town." I stared at her, unable to breathe. He had another family, Evie. A wife. A son. The room spun. The past cracked open like a fault line beneath my feet. "They didn't know about you," Clara said, her voice trembling with grief. "They thought he was a widower. They thought." I shook my head, trying to get rid of the ringing in my ears. "I found out from an old friend," she continued. "I didn't dare tell you for months. But you deserve the truth." I looked at the photo again. 3 children. A little boy with James' stubborn chin, James' dark eyes. My husband didn't just leave me. He replaced me. The betrayal hurt more than anything Miriam had ever done. Deeper. Older. It went to the very core of who I thought I was. Clara reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're not what he left," she said firmly. "You're what survived." I didn't cry. Not then. I folded the papers, put them back in the envelope, and sat still, listening to the rain drumming harder on the glass. Some ghosts, it seems, don't stay buried. But maybe this time I can decide how this story ends. That night, long after Clara had gone and the sky had darkened into an ink-soaked hush, I sat by the window and turned the envelope over and over in my hands. James's betrayal had a weight to it, heavier than grief, heavier than rage. It was the weight of being erased, quietly, efficiently, like a chalk name wiped from a blackboard. Clara had offered to drive me to East Ashbury, the town where James's new family lived. She'd said it gently, like an invitation to close a wound. But I knew it wasn't her choice to make. It was mine. For 3 days, I moved through my house like a woman underwater. I watered the succulents on the windowsill. I fed the stray cat, Beans, who had adopted me 6 months ago. I listened to old records, the kind James hated, and sang along under my breath. I didn't call Miriam. She didn't call me. Finally, on the 4th day, I made up my mind. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want some dramatic scene where I confronted James's widow and pointed fingers, demanding explanations that would never satisfy. What I wanted, what I needed, was peace. So I packed a small bag. Just a change of clothes, a toothbrush, the envelope, and a worn photograph of me and Clara from 1968, laughing with our arms around each other in front of a battered Volkswagen. I left the house at dawn, the sky still bruised with night. The drive to East Ashbury took less than an hour. The roads were quiet, the fields stretching out in endless waves of gold and rust. When I arrived, I didn't go to their house. Instead, I parked at the cemetery. I found James's grave easily enough. The town was small. The plot was modest, the headstone plain. James Moore, 1942 to 1999, beloved husband and father. I stared at those words for a long time, feeling a slow, simmering sadness that didn't boil over, didn't consume me. It just sat there, heavy and inevitable. He was someone else's beloved. Someone else's father. Not mine. I sat down cross-legged on the grass, the morning dew soaking through my jeans, and I spoke. "I forgive you," I said. The words surprised me as they left my mouth. Not because they weren't true, but because I hadn't realized how ready I was to be free. "I forgive you," I repeated softer. "Not because you deserve it, but because I do." I placed the photograph of me and Clara at the base of the headstone. A little rebellion, a little reminder that there were parts of me he never took, never even knew. Then I stood, brushed off my knees, and walked back to the car. As I pulled away from the cemetery, I passed a small park. 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, were chasing a bright red ball across the grass. Their laughter floated on the breeze, sweet and sharp. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. Life was still happening, still bursting into bloom in places I hadn't thought to look. And I wasn't done living it. Not yet. The road back to Redmond Pines felt different. Lighter somehow. I rolled the windows down, letting the wind tangle my hair, letting the world in again. I had forgiven James. I had closed that chapter. I thought that was the end of the story. But endings are tricksters. They often arrive disguised as beginnings. I pulled into my driveway just as the sun was dipping low, setting the hills ablaze with color. Beans the cat darted out from under the porch, meowing indignantly as if I'd been gone a month instead of a day. "I'm home," I whispered, kneeling down to scratch behind his ears. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender and old books, my scent, the life I'd built with my own 2 hands. I put the kettle on, slipped into my worn slippers, and leaned back into the rhythm of being alone but not lonely. I was just sitting down with my tea when the knock came. Not the hesitant, apologetic knock of a salesman or a neighbor needing sugar. No, this was a firm, decisive knock. The kind that said, "You're going to want to hear this." I opened the door. There stood a woman I didn't recognize. Mid-30s, maybe younger. Long dark hair pulled into a low braid, jeans that had seen better days, a canvas messenger bag slung across one shoulder. "Mrs. Moore?" she asked, voice steady but uncertain. "Yes." She smiled, a little nervously, and thrust out her hand. "I'm Harper Jensen. I work with the Historical Society." I blinked. Of all the things I expected, this wasn't on the list. "Historical Society?" She nodded, shifting on her heels. "We're restoring the old courthouse downtown. Turns out, a lot of the original property deeds were never properly archived. Some important pieces of town history could be lost." I crossed my arms, wary but curious. "And you need what from me?" Harper's smile widened a little, gaining confidence. "We're trying to track down the families who owned the original land parcels. Your name came up." Actually, she dug into her bag and pulled out a crumbling, yellow document. "Your family's name came up." She placed the deed in my hands. My breath caught. "Moore Estate, parcel number 3, Redmond Pines, 1904. I stared at it. I'd always thought the land had been bought by James's grandfather. But this was older. Signed by a Margaret and Moore. My great-grandmother. "We'd love to feature your family's story in the exhibit," Harper said gently. "If you're willing." I traced the faded ink with my finger, feeling a tether stretch across the years, binding me to a woman I'd never met but suddenly felt in my bones. My family's story. Not the story of betrayals and abandonments. The story of survival. Of roots that ran deep and stubborn through dust and drought and disappointment. "I'd be honored," I said, my voice thick with something that felt suspiciously like hope. Harper grinned. "I'll come by next week. Maybe we can go through some old photos, talk about the history." "We'll do that," I said, meaning it. As I closed the door behind her, the house felt warmer somehow. Fuller. Maybe it wasn't too late after all. Maybe the story wasn't ending. Maybe it was just finally being told right. The next morning, I woke with an ache in my hands, a sure sign of rain, and a purpose stirring under my ribs. If Harper Jensen wanted the story of the Moore family, she was going to get it. But first, I needed to find it. The attic had been closed off for years. I'd been too busy, too tired, too unwilling to face the dusty reminders of a life long gone. But now, pulling down the creaky ladder and climbing up into the stale air, I felt something like anticipation humming through me. The space was a museum of my past. Old trunks, battered suitcases, boxes labeled in my late husband's tidy handwriting. I tugged on the string of the bare bulb, and the attic bloomed into light, revealing the ghosts that lived here, silent and patient. I started with the nearest trunk, a heavy cedar thing that smelled of mothballs in memory. Inside were old quilts, yellowed newspaper clippings, brittle report cards from when Miriam was still a girl with pigtails and missing teeth. Hours passed. Dust coated my hands, my knees ached, and still I dug. It was near sunset when I found it, a small, battered chest tucked behind a stack of broken furniture. No lock, no key, just a rusted latch that gave way with a groan. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them, black and white, sepia-toned, faces I barely recognized staring solemnly back at me. I ran my fingers over them, feeling a lump form in my throat. And tucked among the photos, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth, was something heavier. I unwrapped it carefully, revealing a leather-bound journal. Margaret and Moore. My great-grandmother. The pages were delicate, ink faded, but legible. And as I read, hunched in the dusty attic, the story of a woman I'd never met came alive. How she had crossed the plains as a girl, losing 2 sisters to fever. How she had fought to claim her parcel of land in Redmond Pines after her husband died young, raising 3 children alone in a house she built with her own hands. How she had survived droughts, dust storms, and neighbors who tried to drive her off her land because a woman had no place running a farm alone. How she had refused to give up. Each page was a testament to her grit, her sorrow, her hope. Tears blurred my vision as I turned the last page. Written there in a shaky but defiant hand was a single line. "We are not the sum of what we lose. We are the sum of what we refuse to let go." I clutched the journal to my chest, feeling a kinship deeper than blood. This was the story Harper needed. This was the story I needed. I carried the chest downstairs, set it gently on the kitchen table, and sat there for a long time, tracing the worn leather with my fingertips. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking backward with regret. I was looking backward to build something new. By the time Harper returned the following week, I had the journal cleaned, the photographs organized into tidy piles, and a fresh pot of coffee brewing. I felt ready, or as ready as a woman could feel when dusting off the forgotten bones of a family's history. Harper arrived with her smile and her notepad and a digital recorder she placed between us like a tiny, blinking heart. We spent hours going through the materials. I read aloud passages from Margaret Ann's journal. I showed Harper the photos of my great-grandmother in a high-neck dress, standing proud and defiant before a half-built farmhouse. Harper listened with a reverence I hadn't seen from anyone in years. She wasn't just hearing my words, she was honoring them. When she packed up her things to leave, she hugged me tightly. "This your story, it's going to be the centerpiece of the exhibit," she said, her voice bright with excitement. "You're going to be the keynote speaker at the opening gala." My stomach dropped. "Me? Speak?" Harper nodded, smiling. "Who better than you to tell it?" I hadn't spoken in front of a crowd since the PTA bake sale in 1982, and even then, my voice had cracked so badly I'd hidden behind a tray of lemon bars for the rest of the night. "I'll think about it," I said, but deep down I already knew. I was tired of being silent. Tired of being a footnote. This time I would tell the story. The days leading up to the gala were a blur of nerves and preparation. Clara helped me pick out a dress, a simple navy sheath with a string of my mother's pearls. I practiced my speech in the mirror in the kitchen, even once to Beans the cat, who blinked up at me with lazy indifference. The night of the gala, the town hall buzzed with people. Fairy lights draped from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the crowd. Tables lined the walls with artifacts, photographs, journals, yellowed maps, each telling a sliver of Redmond Pine's story. When my turn came, I climbed the steps to the podium with my heart hammering against my ribs. I scanned the crowd and nearly faltered. Miriam stood near the back, arms crossed, mouth a tight, skeptical line. I steadied myself. She could listen or not. She could approve or not. This wasn't for her. This was for me. I began to speak. I told them about Margaret and more about the girl who crossed the plains, the woman who refused to give up her land, the mother who built a future with her bare hands. I told them about legacy, how it wasn't always something you inherited neatly, like china dishes or a pocket watch. Sometimes legacy was a thing you had to dig up from the attic dust, wrestle from silence, and choose to carry forward. When I finished, the room was so quiet I could hear the creak of the wooden floor beneath my shoes. Then applause. Real roaring applause. I blinked back tears, smiled, and for the first time in a long time felt truly seen. Afterward, people crowded around the displays. Harper beamed. Clara hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. Even Miriam approached slowly like a woman crossing thin ice. "You were good," she said, voice grudging. I smiled soft but sure. "I know." She opened her mouth like she might say more, but then Chase appeared behind her, tugging on her arm, whispering something in her ear. She turned away without another word. And I let her. Some bridges are meant to burn. Some are meant to be left to crumble into the river they cross. I turned back to the crowd, to the future, to the life still waiting for me. I wasn't just part of the story anymore. I was the one telling it. As the crowd began to thin and the warm chatter filled the town hall, I wandered to a quiet corner near the refreshment table, needing a moment to breathe. That's when I noticed him. A man, maybe a few years younger than me, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, standing alone by one of the exhibit tables. He wasn't admiring the artifacts with idle curiosity like the others. No, he was reading Margaret Ann's journal pages with a quiet, almost reverent focus, as if every word mattered. He caught me watching and smiled. Not the easy, forgettable kind, but a smile that settled somewhere deep in your chest. "You spoke beautifully," he said, his voice low and steady. "Your great-grandmother would be proud." I felt heat rise to my cheeks, an unfamiliar warmth after so many years spent feeling invisible. "Thank you," I said. "She was remarkable." He stepped closer, extending his hand. "I'm Daniel Whitaker. I'm with the Pine County Historical Committee. Moved back a few months ago after retiring from the university." I shook his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength still lingering there. "Evelyn Moore," I replied, even though he already knew. "I figured," he chuckled. "Hard not to after tonight." We stood there for a moment, two people surrounded by the buzz of celebration, yet somehow wrapped in our own pocket of stillness. Your story, he said, voice dropping slightly. It reminded me that roots don't always mean staying in one place. Sometimes they mean finding your way back to who you are. The words hit me harder than I expected. Maybe because I hadn't realized how deeply I'd needed someone to see that. Daniel didn't push for more conversation. He simply offered a gentle, respectful smile. If you ever want to talk history, he said, or just share a cup of coffee, I'd be honored. He tucked a small card into my hand, his number handwritten in careful script, and then with one last nod, he disappeared into the milling crowd. I stood there, the card clutched in my hand, heart pounding like a young girl's. For years, I told myself the best parts of my story were behind me, but maybe, just maybe, there were still a few chapters left to write. The card sat on my kitchen table for 3 days. I moved it from spot to spot, next to the sugar jar, atop the stack of unpaid bills, tucked into the spine of Margaret Ann's journal, as if proximity might make the decision for me. It didn't. Each morning I found myself staring at it while sipping my coffee, hearing Daniel's words echo in my mind. If you ever want to talk history. But this wasn't about history. Not really. This was about opening a door I had locked so tightly. The key had rested in my hand. After James left, after Miriam drifted into someone I barely recognized, I had built walls. High, thick, silent walls. I told myself they were protection, but they had become a prison. And now here was a simple card, a simple invitation daring me to step out. On the 4th morning, I woke to golden sunlight spilling through the kitchen window, beans sprawled in a patch of warmth on the floor, and a strange feeling fluttering in my chest. Hope. I picked up the phone before I could lose my nerve. Daniel answered on the 2nd ring. Evelyn, he said, like he'd been expecting me. Good morning. Good morning, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I was wondering, are you still offering that cup of coffee? He laughed, rich and easy. I was hoping you'd ask. We met at Willow's, the tiny cafe near the edge of town where the booths were cracked and the waitresses called you honey without irony. When I walked in, Daniel stood up immediately, waving from a corner booth. He looked different in the daylight, less formal, more familiar, like someone I'd known in another life. We talked for hours. About books, about small towns, about the sharp edges and soft places life leaves behind. We laughed, really laughed, until my sides ached. I told him about Margaret Ann, about Clara, about losing myself and finding pieces again in dusty attics and quiet mornings. He listened the way few people ever had, not waiting for his turn to speak, but truly hearing. As the sun dipped low and the waitress refilled our coffee cups for the 3rd time, Daniel reached across the table and lightly touched my hand. You have a story worth telling, he said quietly. And you're still living it. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away, smiling. For once I believed him. Maybe life wasn't about waiting for the perfect moment. Maybe it was about stepping forward, even if your knees shook. Maybe it was about daring to hope again. That night, when I climbed into bed, I tucked Daniel's card into my nightstand next to Margaret Ann's journal. 2 reminders, one from the past, one from the present, both whispering the same thing. It's not too late. It was a Sunday afternoon when I heard the knock. Not Daniel's knock, not Harper's polite tapping. This was hesitant, uneven, the knock of someone carrying a heavy heart. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, heart sinking even before I reached the door. Miriam stood on the porch, arms hugged around her waist, eyes rimmed red. Hi, Mom, she said, voice small. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Beans wound his way around my ankles, sensing the shift in the air. Finally, I stepped aside. Come in, I said, though every bone in my body trembled with the weight of old wounds. She sat at the kitchen table, my kitchen table, and looked around like she didn't recognize it. I poured 2 cups of coffee. Black. No sugar. Just like she used to drink it when she thought being bitter made her strong. I heard about the gala, she said after a while, picking at the edge of the napkin. I'm glad, I said simply. She swallowed hard. You were always stronger than I gave you credit for. I didn't answer. I waited. She blew out a shaky breath. I came to say I'm sorry. The words hung between us, fragile as spun glass. I was wrong, she said. About Chase. About the money. About you. Still, I said nothing. Because apologies, I had learned, are like seeds. Words are easy. Roots take work. We lost everything, she said quietly. The house, the business. Chase moved out last month. Took a job out west. I nodded, a slow, measured thing. And you? I asked. Her face crumpled for just a second before she pulled herself upright. I'm staying with a friend. Looking for a job. She hesitated. I was wondering if. She trailed off, staring into her coffee cup. If what? She looked up, her eyes brimming. If I could stay here. Just for a little while. Until I get back on my feet. The kitchen seemed to shrink, the walls leaning closer. The daughter who had discarded me. The daughter who had sold my trust like cheap jewelry. Now asking for sanctuary. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted to close the door and lock it to protect the fragile peace I had built with bloody hands. But another part, the part shaped by Margaret Ann's stubborn hope, by Clara's steady faith, by Daniel's quiet kindness, knew better. Forgiveness wasn't weakness. Forgiveness was strength. But forgiveness did not mean foolishness. You can stay, I said carefully, but there will be rules. She blinked. You will work. You will pay rent, whatever you can. You will treat this house and me with respect. Tears spilled over her lashes. I will, she whispered. I set my coffee cup down and stood. Then you can stay, I said. But understand, Miriam, this is a second chance. Not a second chance to hurt me. She nodded, a sob breaking loose from her chest. I opened my arms and she folded into them, smaller than I remembered, trembling with the weight of all we had lost and maybe, just maybe, all we still had to find. Living with Miriam again was like wearing an old coat that no longer fit, the sleeves too tight, the fabric scratchy in all the wrong places. At first it was small things. She left her shoes in the middle of the living room. She forgot to rinse her dishes. She played her music a little too loud, late into the evening. I bit my tongue more times than I could count. She was trying. I could see that. But years of resentment and misunderstanding don't untangle themselves overnight. They hang in the corners like cobwebs, catching on everything you try to build anew. One morning, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, shoulders slumped, a pile of job applications spread before her. Any luck? I asked, keeping my voice light. She shook her head without looking up. They don't want someone my age, she muttered. They want shiny, cheap, and quick. Not worn out and complicated. The words hit me with a pang of recognition. You're not worn out, I said, setting a cup of coffee beside her. You're seasoned. There's a difference. For the first time in days, she smiled, a small, uncertain thing, but it was real. We settled into an uneasy rhythm. She picked up part-time work at the florist's, sweeping floors and arranging bouquets, her hands slowly remembering tenderness. I continued my work with the Historical Society, filling my days with old stories and new beginnings. Some nights we ate together in strained silence. Some nights we talked, really talked about small things first. The weather. Bean's latest escapade. A funny customer at the flower shop. Other nights the past reared its head. Like the evening she found me reading Margaret Ann's journal in the sunroom. She sounds amazing, Miriam said, standing in the doorway, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. She was, I said, my voice catching. Miriam hesitated. Do you think she would have forgiven me? She asked quietly. I closed the journal and looked at her, really looked. I think she would have seen how hard you're trying, I said. And she would have loved you anyway. Miriam blinked rapidly, and for a moment, the walls between us cracked just a little more. Healing isn't linear. It's messy, slow, filled with missteps and bitter words and awkward silences. But it's also filled with small mercies. A shared cup of coffee. A repaired chair. A tentative smile across a worn kitchen table. And sometimes that's enough. It was a rainy Tuesday when Harper called. I had just finished folding a load of laundry, Miriam's worn jeans mixed with my faded blouses, when the phone rang, shrill and insistent. Evelyn, Harper said, her voice trembling with excitement, there's something you need to see. Curiosity and a flicker of dread twisted in my stomach. We met at the Historical Society's modest office downtown. Rain pelted the windows, and the whole room smelled like damp paper and old wood. Harper waved me in, practically vibrating with energy. Remember how we talked about the original land grants? She said. We found something else. Something incredible. She handed me a thin file. Inside were pages of old records, and at the very top, a letter. It was from Margaret Ann Moore, dated 1923. In it, she bequeathed her land not just to her children, but to the strong daughters of their daughters and their daughters beyond them. The land wasn't just an inheritance. It was a legacy. A legally binding legacy. And the Historical Society, Harper explained, had secured a grant to restore one of the old Moore homesteads, and they wanted me to oversee the project. We wanted to be more than a museum, Harper said, her eyes shining. We wanted to be a living tribute. Classes. Workshops. A space for stories and memory and strength. I stared at the letter, the ink faded but stubborn. Margaret Ann's voice, reaching across a century, calling me home. You don't have to decide now, Harper said gently. But we'd be honored to have you lead it. I walked home through the rain, the letter tucked against my heart. That night, I sat in the sunroom with Miriam. We sipped tea while the storm raged outside. You know, I said almost to myself, sometimes the world breaks you open so something new can grow. Miriam smiled, soft and sad and hopeful all at once. Maybe, she said, it's time we planted something. And for the first time in a long, long while, I believed her. I believed in us. I believed in beginnings.